The City of Shepherdsville took some time to honor efforts of the military members who served in our Vietnam War. American flags blew in the breeze as a motorcade of ambulances, motorcycles, police cars, and a lot of other vehicles rolled past Bullet Lick Middle School as part of the procession. There was also a cookout to say thank you to the people who fought in one of America's most infamous conflicts.
We have a lot of volunteers that bring out their own Jeeps, the convertibles, their cars, and those veterans get to ride in those vehicles, and they'll come down the main street here and have pictures of their family members that are veterans, and we hoot and holler and sound off air horns and just pay respect that they deserve.
We'll see you here in just should be 10 kicks off.
By the way, National Vietnam War Veterans Day is tomorrow, marking the last day American troops withdrew from the country.